He beats women. He beats women. John Lennon beats women. It's right here on my phone. Look, I'm just telling you something I found out about on the internet that everybody already knows in order to feel self-important, righteous, and smarter than you. So if you can't handle that, you can just go live somewhere else.
Isn't he a beaten man who's not alive?
I'm sorry if I dropped a little truth bomb on you, and it's hard for you to imagine that a celebrity, that a musician, that a rock star wasn't a perfect angel.
What?
I am so smart. I am so moral. I know how everyone should dictate themselves. Everyone should listen to me. When I tell you something is wrong, it's wrong. I'm the greatest. Hi everyone, Kill Yourself Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Nicolas Jaar album, Sirens. Electronic music producer Nicolas Jaar is back with a new surprise album, at least it was a surprise to me. His first studio album since his breakout record in 2015, Space Is Only Noise. Now in between these two records, you may already know that he came out with like a little soundtrack of his own volition, like nobody commissioned him to do it, I believe. He created music to accompany an old Soviet-era avant-garde film. He also had that fantastic collaborative album with Dave Harrington under the Dark Side name. They also did some cool Daft Punk remixes together of songs from Daft Punk's latest record, Random Access Memories. And as good as a lot of that stuff was, I'm pretty excited to hear Nick go back to just solo Nick, album Nick. I want to hear that usual moody, minimalistic, micro house magic he usually conjures, but I do know that he is an experimental and an adventurous artist by nature, so I expect for him to explore some new avenues on this album as well. So I didn't really know what I was going to get going into this record, especially given that it's just 5 tracks, and I came away from this thing surprised at just how much musical ground Nick covers on this thing. The song Leaves is kind of this sour, spacey, ambient piece with some conversation in Spanish slipped underneath the synthetic soundscape. The song 3 Sides of Nazareth is one of the longest in the track listing here, and most of the song orbits around this pretty groovy, like rock beat, rock bass line, but it's very low key, very quiet, very nocturnal. And on top of this groove, Nick delivers a vocal that is very flat, very deadpan, kind of eerie, much like what was on his last album, but a little different this time. Can't quite put my finger on what is making his vocals just have a different flavor this time around. But again, there's something about this track that reminds me of rock and roll music, old rhythm and blues music, like maybe something akin to Tom Waits's Going Out West, but stripped down of all the dirtiness, of all the emotion, of all the filth, of all the griminess, of all of the lust and desire, and turned into something way more cold and robotic. I think it's a cool idea and a cool concept, even if the song does end up being a little too long-winded and tedious. On the song History Lesson, Nick seems to go backwards again and dabbles in a bit of vintage vocal pop, with layers upon layers of breathy, harmonized vocals and falsettos. There are some very shy keyboards worked in there, sparse percussion, a little hand clapping. It's probably the most soulful thing Nick has ever recorded, but it is still super quiet and super subtle like many of his recordings. The song No was another surprising change of pace. It was kind of like a bit of ambient pop with a Latin flavor distinctly coming from the percussion and the way that the keyboards emphasize the upbeat of the groove. Also, Nick sees fit to sing over a majority of the instrumental in Spanish, of course. His voice does get kind of swallowed up in some of the effects that he seems to surround it with, though. And on the song The Governor, there's some jazzy saxophone freakouts, which are backed up with some fantastic breakbeat loops, something that I never would have thought I would hear on a Nick Jaar song. It's actually a really intense track, probably the most fiery production I've heard him pull together, and by a wide margin. And I'm pretty entranced by the blissful and gorgeous synth layers and melodies on the opening track, Killing Time. I'm not so enamored with Nick's falsetto vocals on this track, but I don't know if I'm that enamored with many of his vocals on the track. His voice really is a focal point on this album. I mean, it's incredibly shy and quiet a lot of the time, but it's way more prominent and appears way more often than it has on past projects. And those are the 5 tracks on this album. In a nutshell, this album is pretty inconsistent. Nick doesn't really settle on one style or sound or delivery or anything. And not that there's anything wrong with a varied album, though I will say there is a thread of subtlety that seems to run through every song here. My issue is that I don't think a lot of what Nick mimics on this album is done all that well. Either I don't think his very quiet musical style complements some of the genres that he's toying with, or I'm really underwhelmed by his vocals a lot of the time on this record, which is a bit of a shame because I liked his vocals so much on his last record, even though they were very quiet and odd and off-putting too. They seem to fit and make sense on Spaces Only Noise, which is a very abstract, very strange album. On this new album over here, it's like he's trying to put these vocals into more of a pop context, and he just does not have the voice for it, or even really try to have the voice for it. The album feels so short to me as well, despite being 42 minutes long, and that might have a lot to do with, I think, some of these songs don't really justify their song lengths all that well. Some of them are very lengthy, but feature sort of repetitive ideas that I think could have been cut back. As a fan of Nick's work previously, I was definitely intrigued by a lot of the risks he was taking on this record. I just don't think a whole lot of it panned out into anything amazing, you know, nothing I'd really be excited to return to. But I was certainly intrigued while the album was on, and I enjoyed a lot of the atmospheres he was conjuring, even if a lot of them just ended up kind of hanging in the background for me and not adding up to much more than just, you know, some pleasant and somewhat eerie wallpaper. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this record. Transition, have you given this new Nicolas Jaar album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry if you hate my thoughts on this album, though feel free to leave a comment. All right. Also, all this stuff next to me, to the side of me, click on that stuff. Click on some of it. Click on something over there. You guys are the greatest ever. Forever.